order the Monday, February 7th Town Council meeting. To join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Up first on the agenda is the approval of the memorandum of January 18th, 2022 regular town council meeting. A copy of those have been of that has been posted. Are there any questions or comments from councilors?
I make a motion to approve.
Second. First by Councilor Garrett, second by Councilor Culp. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Up next is a request to speak on agenda item. Amy, other than the tentative, are we?
That was the only one.
Okay.
We have no others.
Very good. So we'll move on to the mayor administration update. Amy, is there a mayor or administration update?
No, there is not.
Mr. President, I've
Yes.
got two things, and I know the mayor is not here, but two things I just want to put on the record as having asked, and I'll get a response hopefully at some point. But one is I would like to know if we have engaged Crow to do a full audit of our financials since they've been re-engaged with the town. I think it's important that that gets done. The other is there was some ambiguity in the mayor's statement today about the appeal ruling. I would just simply like to ask her, straight up if she intends to be done suing the town council.
Can I add to the question list? I would love to know, now that we don't have a CFO, when that's going to be done. And I would also like to know how OpenGov is going. And basically, I'd like to know when we're going to get some financials. That would be great. I think the other thing I'd like to hear from is this council in May of 2021 approved $145,000 for Winterfest, which was supposed to be self-sustaining. It was sort of the seed funding. And I would love to hear a report on how that went. I got a lot of positive feedback on the event, but I'd like to know financially, is it self-sustaining? What's going to happen next year? Things like that. So we'll add that to the list of things we'd like to get answered.
Very good. Anything else from anybody? Next is a consideration of the ordinance establishing the people for Zionsville for the aesthetics of Zionsville, also known as pizzazz. This is ordinance 2022-01. This is the final reading. Heather, I believe you'll be presenting on this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. As you indicated, this is the second reading of this ordinance establishing the People for Zionsville for the Aesthetics of Zionsville pizzazz committee. This has been a committee that's been in effect, just to remind you, since December 4th, 1995. Their leadership came to us a few months back and asked to expand the number of members from 5 current members appointed by the town council to a total of 7 members. And that is the action you have before you tonight.
Thank you. Heather, just to be clear, you mentioned in there that their leadership, the folks on pizzazz requested
Correct.
This is not something that's been initiated from the town council.
Correct. Yes, it was during a presentation I believe they made in October or November, just talking about the work of pizzazz and then asking for additional leadership. They had 2 members they had identified that they felt would bring some additional expertise to pizzazz and wanted to see that codified into statute. When we started researching just to add the additional 2 members, we learned that this ordinance or this committee had never really been established formally by ordinance. So that is the point of making sure we now have that as an official body of the town of Zionsville. And then we're including the 2 additional members that were requested.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from council or any discussion?
Sense.
Move to adopt. I got a first by Councilor Burke.
Second.
Second by Councilor Garrett. I'm sorry, Vice President Burke. Second by Councilor Garrett. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed. Up next is a consideration of a resolution amending the Zionsville Master Development Park Plan, impact fees. This is resolution 2022-01. Jared, I believe you're presenting for this. Great, thank you.
All right, in 2020, the Parks Department, in collaboration with the Parks Board, sought at establishing a new updated park impact fee to reflect the changes in the census data and our growth and better accommodate that. So a park impact fee is just another tool that a park system can use to keep up with growth and establish green infrastructure and park amenities. So it is not a fee to our current residents, but it is a component of the building permit application process. It is established with that. So truly, this is development funding development. So in 2012, the original impact fee was established at $1,221 per single family unit and $733 per multifamily apartment unit. In 2020, a committee was formed with park board members, planning members, and residents to review the calculation process for this updated 2021 calculation. And again, that calculation is based on population, estimated housing for a forecast of up to 2030, the year 2030. It also establishes a level of service and a target service ratio per resident. So what that means is for every 1,000 residents in Zionsville, we would like to see 16 acres. And for every 5,000 residents, that's one sports field. So then we utilize that level of service and extrapolate kind of what the need for park amenities is going to be as the population continues to grow. So by 2030, we will generate a need for park amenities just under $7.5 million. So quite the growth in our segment. And after some credits, this fee is reduced to around $3.8 million, and that is divided between the estimated new housing units entering our community in those 10 years. So the new 2021 calculation before you tonight within the resolution is for single family to be at $2,045 and for multifamily apartment to be at that $941. So again, in 2012, that was established at $1,221 for single family and $733 for multifamily. So over that 10-year period, for single family, it's about an $824 difference. And for multifamily units, that's $208. Once the calculation was complete and the study finalized by Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors, we proceeded to the Park Board in September and presented the information and then presented before the Plan Commission at the December 20th, 2021 meeting and received a favorable recommendation, 7 in favor, 0 opposed, to be before you tonight. So the resolution is to establish the new 2021 calculation for single family $2,045 and multifamily apartment for $941. Happy to answer any questions.
Jared, is that multifamily apartment fee per door? 100 unit apartment would pay 100 fees effectively.
Yes. Yeah. So then that data, a single family is going to have a larger impact on park amenities because there's usually more people living within a house than an apartment complex. So all of that information is calculated within this new adjusted calculation fee as well. Just a little more context. There's not really a park system around us that doesn't utilize park impact fees. Brownsburg, Whitestown, Westfield, Noblesville, Fishers, Carmel, and our fee heads towards the top of that. It'd be just above Fishers, but less than half of Carmel's impact fee. So still utilizing a responsible calculation for our level of service.
How are these fees assessed or acquired?
So in the building permit application process, the developer would pay per unit those established fees. And then those are retained in a separate fund and can only be utilized for those level of service target service ratios that are identified in the current park impact fee resolution. So these funds can only be used to meet us up with our inventory that we would want. It can't go beyond. So for instance, we can't utilize these funds to build more paved trail because Zionsville has a lot of paved trails. We're doing really well in that department. But the new inventory target for residents would be 16.5 acres per 1,000 residents. So as we continue to grow, we need to meet that deficit, and these funds help with land acquisition in that instance.
Thank you.
Are these fees ever calculated? Are they always a fixed fee per dwelling versus a percentage of the home cost? So a $500,000 home is paying the same fee as a $3 million home?
Yes, so it is per occupancy average. So it is a standard rate. 1.5% inflation is factored into that over the 10-year period. But that is why these plans are to be updated every 5 years. So in 5 years, we'll be before you again with a new calculation potentially.
Can they be altered in between now and then? If for whatever reason we felt like we needed to increase them or lower them, could we?
If we see, exponential growth, or we think that that no longer is relevant calculation, we can, at any time within that 5-year period, readdress the situation and perform a new calculation.
So to answer Josh's question, the reason it's a flat fee as opposed to assessed by the value of the home is because it's just a matter of heads in the house, right? So it doesn't really matter if someone's got a family of 4 or 5, that's people using the parks. So it doesn't.
Yep. So a family of 4, regardless of the size of their home, still utilize the same amount of trash cans or playgrounds or sports fields.
Right.
Any other questions from council? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second. First by Counselor Garrett, second by Counselor Choi. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, motion passes, I should say, 6 in favor, 0 opposed. Up next is a consideration of ordinance to establish equitable impact fee for the purpose of planning and financing park and recreational infrastructure to serve new developments in the town of Zionsville. Ordinance 2022-02. This is a first reading. And Jared, I believe you're up for this one as well.
So the same information, and we kind of already poked at that this is an equitable charge, not even a charge, an equitable fee that goes along with new development across Zionsville. So regardless of size of home, it'll be a flat rate for our new residents coming in to contribute to the infrastructure that's in place. So this truly allows us to better keep up with development and growth as Zionsville continues to expand.
Very good. Any questions here? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to introduce on the first reading.
Second.
By Counselor Traylor, second by Vice President Burke. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed. Thanks, Jared. First item up on new business is consideration of ordinance to amend the Town of Zionsville zoning ordinance, ordinance 2022-03. Wayne DeLong, I believe you're going to present on this.
Thank you and good evening. What is brought to you this evening is a recommendation from your Plan Commission related to property on 700 East. This is brought to you with a favorable recommendation 5-1 for rezoning of 2.25 acres from the RSF1 classification to the R1 classification to R2 classification. This is rural to provide for residential development.
Why?
The classification the current classification provides for a density of half an acre if on sewer. This new density would allow for a zoning classification that would support 1.75 units an acre, ultimately supporting future residential development of the parcel.
Who wants this done?
This is a filing by administration, so the town of Zionsville, certainly supporting, as you recall, the presentation to the town council a few months back related to Habitat for Humanity.
This is the Habitat stuff?
Sorry?
This is the Habitat for Humanity, is that right?
Correct. As presented to this body a few months back, there is an organization that is proposing a project, and certainly this rezoning is a result of that conversation. Correct. Certainly any transaction is a future conversation and is unrelated to the zoning petition that was filed with the plan commission.
It's not unrelated if that's the plan. Correct?
Well, that decision is from ultimately the town councils for that donation or any sort of transaction that would be tied to that.
It would come back to us for a donation, right?
Correct. The only action tonight is the legislative action of changing the zoning from one classification to another within compliance with the comprehensive plan, which is only one of several metrics, measuring points related to that conversation. Certainly zoning in Indiana is at the pleasure of the legislative body.
Hard sometimes to isolate these decisions because they sort of domino effect down, right? So we had the presentation from Habitat. I think it's an excellent organization. The end goal is to donate the land. I got a bunch of letters in support of Habitat this week, but the decision has really nothing to do with Habitat. I think my problem with these things that come in front of us right now is I feel we would be making a decision that would impact a decision that is being made in a vacuum because we don't have all the information. And the information we don't have is that financial information. And I know we keep harping at it. Wayne, this is nothing for you. But that land has value. I don't have any idea what the town's finances are right now. Eventually we would have to donate that land that has value that we may need to sell to support finances. But again, we don't know. So it's so hard to make these decisions in a vacuum. We don't have the systems giving us the reports. We don't have a CFO to give us the financials. I get more and more frustrated as I feel that lack of financials is holding this town back. Like, I would like to donate this land if I had a good sense that we could afford to do it. But until I have a good sense that we can afford to do anything, it's hard to make any decision. And that's just where I'm at right now. It is nothing against Habitat. There's nothing against this rezone, but it is everything against not having the information that I feel I need to do my job to represent the people that I represent. So I'm not voting. I'm going to vote no for this. It has nothing to do with Habitat. It has nothing to do with the ask. It has everything to do with I don't have the information I need to do my job. And that is frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I share in your frustration, not just from that perspective, but even understanding this is a petition that comes from the administration requesting that data a month and a half ago, or a month ago, I should say, requesting financial data. We heard at the Plan Commission meeting, fire department still uses this for training. They used it over 700 hours last year. They used it for 1,000 hours or more over the last few years. And I'd sent a request just asking to kind of pump the brakes on this until we get financial information, until we find a training facility for the fire department. I'm with Josh. I get frustrated because it sounds like we're beating a dead horse here. I mean, we've been asking about financial information for the better part of 2 years. And it seems like the only way we get any information is if we continue to do it and something comes up and it doesn't move forward because we don't have financial information, then suddenly it'll show up. So
we have alternate training facilities for the fire department earmarked, planned, thought about, any kind of alternate site contemplated at all? So if this gets donated, what's the timeline for any process to relocate this?
I would say if Wayne had that information, he would share that information with us. I mean, I don't know that. I feel like this was, we got the presentation at the December council meeting and the request was, is it okay if we move forward with communication? And the council was like, sure, it's okay to move forward with communication. And next thing you know, a rezone request comes through, which is somewhat expected, I guess, at this point. But it's frustrating because we went from continue to talk about it to let's execute the plan.
Well, then again, that's why it's hard to make a decision as an individual decision because there are all these other pieces that get impacted. If you don't have the information for that, it's hard to make that one decision.
Wayne, is there other land owned by Zionsville that could be used currently for the fire department?
So backing up a step, this is a single family dwelling that the town purchased in 2016 on 2.25 acres. This ground has been utilized by the fire department for their training purposes, much like they've utilized the old town hall and other structures as they come available. I'm not in a position to answer as to what the plan is to facilitate the fire department's future use of town assets for training purposes more than what you see today. Certainly the fire department's here in the room if you wish to speak to them about what their needs are.
So if we do approve the zoning change, and say subsequently do not approve the donation to Habitat, with the new zoning, nothing would change for the fire department essentially, right? They could use it the same way they're using it today.
Again, the property is approved with a single family dwelling. The new information to this board would be, or this body would be, that the R1 classification or the R2 classification would support governmental use of property. So certainly the future use of that property or today's use of the property by the government is certainly supported. Certainly any building code, public improvements, other things that would be necessary to facilitate the ongoing use or even current use is beyond this conversation.
So when we bought that land 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when that was brought before this council, I had full financial information on the town. I had a full picture of what land would cost. I had a full plan of what the use of that land was going to be, which was to basically connect the pathway so that Z West could have people walking to it. And so I sort of had, here's where we are, here's where we're going to end up, here's kind of the whole strategic idea. There were some nice side benefits like the training that came on. My votes, until they have full financial information, are going to be leaning towards saying no to things, not because I don't believe them, but because I just don't have the information. And so if that's a wake-up call to start getting us the information, great. I would love to start doing these things if I had this information, but we can't necessarily make a decision in a vacuum because it has implications potentially down the road.
So I just want to be clear, we're rezoning, so we're not approving the donation.
No, correct.
Right, correct.
So another issue I have here is I hate for Habitat that they're kind of being caught in the middle of something that has nothing to do with them, unfortunately. But the fact that the person, this was the mayor's idea and she's not here to state her case, that's not helping. I don't know. It's just, I support Habitat. I want to do this. I'll end up probably voting yes for the rezone, but it'll be hard to do the donation. And I'm looking at you, Wayne, just because you're standing there, but it'll be hard to do the donation without some commitment from the administration for the financials, and specifically for the Crow audit that the town council has requested. It's hard to make any decision when we don't know where we stand on a month-to-month basis.
I'm actually with Counselor Trailer on that. Is if the fire department can still use it until, even if we rezone it until something else happens, I don't have any problem with the zone changing. But if the property is going to be sold, we definitely need financials. But there's no doubt about it. But I also don't want us to hold on through one more loophole. If we can get this rezoned and then they can give us the financials, then it's one day sooner that Habitat gets what they need.
And that's exactly.
I tend to agree. But there are a lot of things that are unanswered in this whole process that we really, the fire department, the financials, we keep harping on all this, right? So
I guess
we've been asking these questions for weeks now.
For years.
Sorry.
Is there, Heather, obviously, I know we've got this American Rescue Plan Act presentation that you're going to do later. Is there anything in the American Rescue Plan Act that allows for this $6.4 million to be, some of that money to be donated to not-for-profits? Or,
Yes.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking like, you know, if there's something there that we can identify, that might make sense as opposed to, you know, going this route.
There is a lot of flexibility, and we are going to do a presentation on it, talk a little bit specifically about premium pay, but there's a number of things that the town can use their American Rescue Plan Act funds for, including one broad category. Veronica, this is my colleague Veronica Schilb, who's going to join me later. One broad category is that you can use it for lost revenue. And in the interim final rule, which we'll talk about sort of the nuances between the two, there was some limitations on that. Now in the new final rule, there's sort of a broad threshold that you can use up to $10 million. So there is some way in which the town could sweep some portion of our $6.4 million into a bucket called lost revenue. And then basically it allows us to use that money for any sort of permissible government service. So it's a pretty key flexibility that was in the final rule that wasn't in the interim final rule. Needs to be part of a plan, which I know is something the town council is interested in. I know the mayor also, is something we'll do in consultation with the mayor. But there's a number of different ways that you could spend it. I think an organization like Habitat, you could make a case, would be a permissible use because you're looking at the impact of the pandemic on individuals, particularly low-income individuals, which is a lot of what ARPA is focusing in on, and things like, lost jobs, lost revenues to be able to support sustainable housing. So I think we could probably get to some rationale if there was an intent to maybe give a grant or, some sort of incentive to organizations looking at low-income housing as part of ARPA. I think we'd want to be thoughtful in the context of a broad spending plan, and obviously do that in consultation with the mayor who needs to be involved in that process. But I think there's definitely a case we could make.
Well, I'm certainly encouraged by that answer. I guess the first I've kind of heard a lot of detail about this. You're fairly confident?
Well, yes, I think so, because and I'm looked at Veronica because she's been my ARPA expert, but there's categories by which you can already spend that are specifically enumerated in ARPA. One is for public health and other economic impacts. Economic impacts could be things like grants to small businesses in the village, grants to restaurant owners who stayed open during the pandemic to serve the community, grants to local restaurants or businesses that supported essential services, things like launderers and laundries and grocers and those sorts of things. So you've got some flexibility there. And the key in ARPA is really focusing on what is the impact for folks who suffered from the coronavirus, and particularly for those lower income, lower, economic thresholds that people live in, where they are really on the precipice of losing their home or losing their job or losing their business because of the impact of the pandemic. So I definitely think, and Veronica, you can shake your head if you think I'm going off course, but I mean, this is a little bit unique and we'd want to think it through. And I want to promise the Habitat people who I see in the audience. But I think it's definitely something that we could explore as one of the potential uses. That new rule definitely gives a lot more flexibility than it did in the interim rule. So I think are already feeling good as local governments. There's a lot more flexibility with the final rule.
Yeah, I think if that were to happen, and I guess the way it would play out is if they got a donation, so you're saying they would get a donation to purchase something that would be, and if I even remember correctly, like that land was a little bit too large for what they were even wanting to do. So maybe there's another situation who knows? I mean, land's not super cheap.
Grant. I think I remember in the presentation, I think the Habitat folks really stressed two things. one, the cost of land, the fact that they're not currently building in Zionsville. I think I recall the other thing they stressed is the availability of land, which we all know is a hot, regardless of where you are in Indiana, that's a hot topic. So they're nodding yes, so I feel like I listened appropriately. So that's good.
Any other questions for Wayne? I mean, from my perspective, I know we talked about the rezone is separate than the donation. I mean, the two are tied at the hip in my mind, in that if this, then that, right? So if this gets done, then the next step is to come back with an attempt to donate the land. And quite frankly, I just don't have personally the belief that we're going to get everything we need when we need it to make the decision. And with that, we won't be in the same position we're in right now.
I do think that this land is better zoned, better rezoned than it is currently, even if we end up not donating it. That's just my opinion, that the rezone would benefit us if we were to sell it outright. So I'm leaning towards, going with the rezone. I do wish, and I don't understand, anybody else that has a request comes to the council to present their case. And we've got the one person that I think this is a pretty daggone worthwhile cause. Why isn't the mayor here to pitch her idea? Because as I understand it, this was her idea. So I don't understand that.
All right, any other discussion, questions for Wayne, for anybody else?
I guess I am curious. I mean, he said the fire department was here. I asked this, I think, last time, and I think maybe Steve mentioned this, not at our meeting, but at a different meeting. I guess we've already kind of said there's not any other land available, but this land wasn't purchased with the idea initially that it was going to be used for the fire department. It just become convenient. And I always thought it was because it's right next door to the fire station. So I'm just curious, if you didn't have this for some period of time, or we had to go buy the land, I mean, is this a critical place that you guys really use this? Or is it kind of like, yeah, we have it because we could use it, but we have other options to do all the training we need to do if this wasn't available currently? It just seems like that's an important, I know it wasn't the intent of the purchase, but we're using it. And if we didn't have it, we might have to purchase something else.
And what's the life expectancy of it being suitable for training purposes?
I think there were several questions you asked.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you are correct. It was not acquired for the fire department. It's something that came along the way. It has been a benefit to the fire department since the town acquired it. The plan that the fire department has talked about for the past 4 years has been eventually developing the property into a safety village with Vince Randolph, our public education officer. As we look to try and add fire stations in the future, as the community is growing, we will be adding fire stations. There'll be needs in Western Zionsville as we look to address facility needs for the Perry Township Fire Station that's well undersized. So there could be future needs, but to answer your question directly, there is no current plans beyond the use of that site right now. We do not have any other structures to use except for those that pop up in short durations to use before they be demolished for active projects. And those are very timely and have to be moved on very quickly for development to occur.
But changing the zone isn't going to impact whether you guys can use it or not. Like,
Not that I'm aware of.
yeah, if the decision was later for you to make this safe village thing, you could still do it with the new zone if it's approved, right?
That is correct. Or if Habitat were to move forward and get the information you need, and we would need to try and find other land for that intended purpose. So there's a lot of questions, not many answers.
So I don't know if Wayne can answer this, but since it is, correct me if I'm wrong, 5.5 acres, is that correct?
It's 2.2 acres.
Oh, how many acres?
It's, the property is 2.25 acres.
Okay, and how much does Habitat need if we got next to that, under that next level?
And speaking with Habitat, their perfect lot is 60 by 120. So there's plenty more acreage than what they need. So the project would result in platting of 2 to 3 lots possibly not exactly the size that it's their ideal situation. So there's other conversations in terms of another change, a variance, some other development scheme
To split it up.
to make it smaller, but ultimately that's beyond any sort of conversation.
So I mean, even if we approve the zoning change, the fire department still could technically get, 3/4 of that acreage and use it like they are now. Potentially.
Possibly through other development
Yeah.
relief, yes.
I'll make a motion to approve if nobody else has any questions.
Second.
First by Counselor Culp. Second by Counselor Choi. Amy, would you do a roll call?
Sure. President Plunkett,
No.
Vice President Burke,
No.
Counselor Choi,
Yes.
Counselor Culp,
Yes.
Counselor Garrett,
No.
Counselor Melton. Oh, he's not here. Counselor Trailer
Yes.
and.
3-3. Looks like we're gonna come back next month.
Yeah, so just for the public, that since we don't all have all 7 members here, we had 3 members voting in favor, 3 members opposed. It will not die. It will just be recalendared for the next meeting.
Hopefully we can get some financials with it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe a pitch on what this is about.
And that next meeting, for those in the audience still want to be here, is March 7th. We are not having a mid-month meeting. Okay. All right. So that motion will be moved to the, or that ordinance will be moved to the next meeting. Up next on the agenda is a consideration of additional appropriation resolution. This is for County Road 800 East and Oak Street Roundabout. This is resolution 2022-2. Lance, I believe you're presenting.
Yes, thank you and good evening. In 2021, this council approved $1.2 million for the acquisition in the form of property in the form of new right-of-way for the roundabout at the intersection you mentioned. In 2021, we were able to close on 12 of the 16 properties that will be affected by this project. And that was to the tune of about $315,405. We have 4 remaining properties on which yet we have to close. And of course, these are the higher expenses. These are the more complex. These are the properties that are more significantly impacted by this project. Typically, we would like to use an encumbrance process, which is a ministerial process to carry those funds over from one calendar year to another that you have already approved. However, with the limitations of that process and the lack of specific knowledge we have, i.e. the final settlement prices of these properties, exactly whom we will pay in the cases of condemnation, we would pay the courts and not the property owners themselves. It was deemed that the best way to restore these funds that you have already approved is through this additional appropriation. So I am seeking $600,000, which is our current estimate, my current estimate, to finish the acquisition on these 4 properties. And anybody doing the quick math, you should see that we're about $915,000 in our projected expenses for land acquisition, which is about 75% of the original estimate of 1.2. So we are tracking under budget. Let's hope that track continues. So any questions you have, I'm happy to oblige.
Appreciate being able to see the cash balance. Thank you. Of where this is coming from of 4.297 million.
I do what I can.
Any other questions for Lance or anything, counselors? This is a public hearing and I approve the publication, notice of public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. Are there any members from the public who'd like to comment? None. I'll close the public hearing. Any additional discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
First by Counselor Trailer,
Second.
second by Counselor Garrett. All those opposed, say aye, or I'm sorry, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you for your consideration.
Up next on the agenda is a presentation, ARPA COVID premium pay discussion. Heather is going to be presenting this.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I'm glad you're technologically savvy. So I'm also joined tonight for members of the public. I'm Heather Harris. I have the pleasure of being a partner at Barnes and Thornburg and serving as the legal counsel for the Town Council of Zionsville. I'm joined today by my colleague, Veronica Schild. Veronica has sort of become our resident expert at the firm on premium pay and has been following closely the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as the interim rule and now final rule implementing the provisions of ARPA. So I want to take a few minutes. I know there's been a lot of questions by members of the town council, and I was asked by President Plunkett to sort of give a little history of ARPA and share with you a little bit of some of the broad uses that we sort of mentioned earlier, but really focus our time on premium pay, which we've talked about in the context of potential stipends to our law enforcement officers and our fire department members, as well as other essential workers to the town. Just for the members of the public, just to be clear, we're not presenting any plan or we're not presenting any specific idea to you today, nor has the town council or the mayor, I think, formulated any specific plans. We're here only for informational purposes to sort of set the stage for what you might consider and what the mayor's administration might consider moving forward. So one of the things that I wanted to share just sort of at the outset, you've heard a lot about the American Rescue Plan Act, and I'm going to welcome Veronica to jump in, especially since I said she's the expert in case would she'd like to share any additional facts. But when we look at ARPA, this was money by the federal government, as I mentioned, to provide relief to our communities and our states, as well as to many other entities who had been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, with a specific focus on those who are underemployed or low-income individuals who may be hardest hit in our states and in our community. The town of Zionsville is set to receive $6,402,231.80 from the federal government. And it is a plan that we must have fully obligated by December 31st, 2024. And when we say obligated, this means contracts have to be signed, purchase orders have to be signed. We have to have a solid plan of how those dollars are going to be spent. Many communities have already started this process. You've seen communities in our surrounding neighborhoods and around the state who've already awarded premium pay or looked at other investments that they wanted to make in their communities. But we know that we are working, under some specified obligations that the Act requires us to meet, as well as a timeline to have all of that money spent and all of these projects completed no later than December 31st, 2026. So while it seems like far, far away, Lance was just up here and he can tell you it takes a while to get contracts signed, to get contractors to do the work. And so we are working, to be able to move this plan forward as quickly as possible. You may also remember in the fall, I believe it was in October, we actually had an ordinance before the town council where we set up the ARPA fund, which would be a fund that we would receipt all of our money received from the federal government into, and then the town council will need to approve expenditures out of that fund through our normal process. There are very specific ways in which we can spend the money and very important compliance requirements to ensure that we don't have to pay the money back or that we don't lose any of the money that's been allocated to the town. Therefore, as part of what ARPA actually allows and what the final rule actually allows from the Department of Treasury is that the town should, I think, and could, designate some of the money that you're receiving for legal fees, for compliance fees, for accounting fees, for folks to keep, really tight understanding of how we're spending the money and making sure there's fiscal transparency to really, save against having to give any of that money back to the federal government at a later date. So one of the things you'll see on the next slide is the final rule versus the interim rule. This has caused, I think, some confusion in the public. And I think the final rule, as I mentioned earlier, is really giving additional flexibility to state and local governments. The final rule was actually provided by the Department of Treasury on January 6, 2022. So this is very new information. And it replaces the interim final rule as implementing regulation and guidance regarding state and local fiscal recovery funds. So just a quick, tutorial on federal rules. Typically, when a statute is handed down by the federal government and or the state government, the agency will actually implement a rule. In that process, typically what the agency will do is set up an interim rule with interim guidance to those recipients on how they can and should spend the funds. They then notice it to the public, and the public's given a comment period where they can go in and make comments or request changes or clarifications to the interim rule before it becomes final. So we're now dealing with the final rule, and we've got some timelines there in which if we were already spending our dollars, we could still spend under the provisions of the interim rule as long as there was not language that was, less strict than the interim rule. And what we're really looking for now is looking ahead at using the new final rule. And you'll see in that slide some dates there. That final rule becomes effective April 1st. We can actually start using the parameters of the final rule now and moving forward. And so that would be our recommendation to you, is to really focus on that final rule so there's no confusion for the public. On the next slide, you'll see there's sort of an overview of permissible uses. There are really a few things that you can use the funds for. Public health and economic impacts. Those are some of the things that we mentioned communities have looked at. For example, grants to small businesses, grants to essential workers, grants to restaurant workers, a number of things to support public health, including, potentially helping fund a clinic or providing grants to a clinic who provided vaccinations or COVID virus treatments. So there's a number of opportunities within that first bullet. The second is premium pay for essential workers, which we're going to focus our time on. And then replacing lost public sector revenue. The key change there, which I mentioned previously, is that in the final rule, it allows for a community to designate up to $10 million. And that up to $10 million, which we of course don't have that much, but we have, 6.5 basically to spend, you can use for funds for permissible uses of government. I'm going to see if Veronica wants to weigh in on that or any additional commentary there.
Yeah, the government services provision is super broad. So think of, any service that you as a town government would provide is likely eligible. The express exemptions would be like debt service payments or depositing into a rainy day fund. Those sorts of things you can't do, but outside of those exclusions, it's a world of possibilities.
Right. So that really brings us back to the habitat question you had earlier, President Plunkett. You could look at, do you want to give grants to some of your not-for-profits who've been supporting missions aligned, with providing services to low-income individuals, or providing services maybe for jobs training and retraining, or getting people back to work. All of those things are permissible uses from government now. So you could really be very creative in how you wanted to spend the dollars. The town technically could sweep our whole amount into the lost revenue category and then really appropriate it for anything that we might want to, be creative and think about. So it's really a great opportunity. That final rule really gives a lot of additional flexibility that was not included in the interim rule.
Heather, just to confirm that, you don't have to quantify lost revenue. If towns' revenues were down 5%, $1 million, you're not limited to that definable amount. It just has to be less than 10 mil. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's a big change. I'm going to let Veronica speak to this as well, because that's important, and it's created some confusion between the interim rule and the final rule. In the interim rule, you had to do a specific calculation of lost revenue. So you had to say, okay, town of Zionsville, we've been pretty fortunate. We weren't in a position where, people weren't able to pay their bills, or we didn't really see a huge dip in our, property tax revenues or sales tax revenues that we receive. So in many instances, it was very difficult, for people to see a calculation that was really substantial in that lost revenue category, and to be able to do the calculation under the interim rule. So this is really just saying, you can say up to $10 million is lost revenue and you can spend it for whatever you need. And Veronica, do you want to elaborate on that or?
Yeah, that essentially covers it. We'll say from a timing perspective, your project and expenditure report will be due at the end of April of this year. And that's when the town would make its election to use the standard revenue loss allocation, if that's what you want to do.
So that's not necessarily tied then to a signed contract. It's just, you can sweep it in and say, we spent it for this. And then can you, if you still have a balanced budget, can you take the delta and move it to a rainy day fund then?
No, I don't think you can supplant your rainy day fund or any of your debt service. So you would need to sort of leave that off the table. But let's say, for example, you've got the program where you give grants to members of the community. That's an established program already in the town. Let's say you wanted to say, hey, we're going to give $1 million of grants additionally in this next, 4-year cycle to, individuals in the community, organizations that wanted to come forward, in these certain categories. And you really could use it for any category that you're currently eligible to use it. But you could also make a policy decision that you really want to focus it on what I think the spirit of the law was, which is, making sure that people who are low income are receiving services, people who've lost their job can get back to work, people who are, in small businesses on the brink, could maybe continue to operate in the town, or restaurant workers, who had a lot of difficulty during this time. I know several communities have looked at that kind of programming for those kinds of individuals and decided to use the money in that way. But
so let's just say, sorry, Brad, let's just say we wanted to give Lance $1 million to work on infrastructure, right? And his current budget, I'm just making up numbers, is $4 million. Can we give him $1 million of this, his budget stay at $4 million, and then the $1 million that we sort of supplanted would then be rolled over to the next year in kind of a, I'm not calling it a rainy day fund, but just in a, sort of see what I'm getting here is a way to transfer it into departmental budgets. Well, I don't want to have a deficit budget that this then supplements, but I would be curious if I could use this money, this receipts, to pay this down and start building up my cash balances, because I'm not having to pay the things that this budget is now paying down. Does that make sense?
yes. So
Veronica didn't know if she agreed with me. She looked like I was talking.
well, yeah. So typically, and I would want to double check this, and Veronica may want to as well. Typically, you can't use federal funds like this to supplant existing state funds or existing local funds. They really are supposed to be used as a one-time infusion of additional cash to go spend on, the purposes for which they were appropriated under the federal government. Because this is so broad, I've not seen any commentary from the State Board of Accounts to, really clarify that, but we can definitely take a look and try to clarify that before the next meeting.
I just basically, you're saying that, I think they're basically saying you can't use it as part of a normal budget.
Well, I
Correct.
know, but if you are saying that I wanted to spend $100,000 on police to support police salaries, and we've already got that budgeted, can you not then spend it on that? I'm just very curious, because if you can, then this is effectively just very flexible cash, and we should be very careful how we spend it. If it's only one-time uses, then it becomes kind of Brewster's Millions and you're just trying to get rid of it, right?
Yeah, it's not limited to one-time uses. So I think that's important. So, to make Lance happy, I'm going to say, yes, you could give Lance $1 million additional money and he could go out and do road projects that you all have wanted to do, if you chose to sweep that money into lost revenue. That would be a permissible use, and that's definitely something you can do. I think the question I would want to clarify is whether or not you could take money that was allocated in our published budget and supplant it with this federal money. You could definitely take the 4 million we have and give them an extra million, which
and you got to be very careful then not to create a structural deficit if you're bringing this money in to
correct
to
and
recurring charges.
And you need to be careful about that for other purposes too, which I'm sure the State Board of Accounts would want us to look at because of our DLGF property and our published budget and the circuit breakers. And so, I think it would be our recommendation to look at uses to supplement and not supplant existing resources, but we can definitely provide additional clarification. There is some guidance that the State Board of Accounts has been issuing on, uses and ways from the accounting side that you really need to keep track of these dollars. And there's some guidance there as well. And Veronica, anything else to add?
I'd say you can't, you couldn't transfer that, let's say it's $1 million into another fund. It would have to stay in your ARPA fund and then be used for whatever those infrastructure projects would be directly. That would be.
Just run claims against that fund
Yeah,
then, right? Got
yes.
it.
Yep.
And is that fund then, how's that fund budgeted, or how, like if the mayor says, I want to spend $1 million on the roads and we say we want to spend $1 million on police, is there a vetting process then to say like, all right, we're going to allocate this money accordingly?
So in the resolution that you guys passed back in October, that was actually a resolution that came from the administration. It actually established the ARPA fund, which is what Veronica's mentioning. So you need to receipt everything in. The reason they do that is, one, to make sure we know what the federal money is being spent on and that it's permissible use. Two is so it doesn't get commingled into, our DLGF funds that impact our tax circuit breakers and the like. And then also included in the ordinance that you all passed and was signed by the mayor was that you would jointly develop a plan. So as the town council and the mayor shall jointly develop a plan. ARPA talks a lot about the executive and the executive, deciding sort of what the permissible uses would be. But it also clearly says that the town council has to approve and appropriate any monies to be spent from the ARPA funds. So it's going to be almost like we have a $6 million budget that we're appropriating sort of separate and apart from our current budget process. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, so premium pay, I know you all want to go home at some point tonight, so we'll try to speed it up here a little bit, but I know this is important to all of you. So premium pay is really what you might think of as hazard pay. So the federal government through the Department of Treasury has really used that term to denote that this is really additional pay and compensation for individuals who regularly were in the public, interfacing with the public, handling public mail during the COVID pandemic, something that was sort of over and above their actual job and over and above what was expected of others in positions in the town. There is some flexibility that's been given, and we'll talk to that a little bit about the definition of eligible employee that's changed in the final rule. But really, the spirit was compensating workers that by virtue of their employment, they were forced to take on additional burdens and make great personal sacrifices as the result of COVID-19. So we've seen a number of communities in the state who have awarded premium pay, for example, to police and fire. Individuals in our fire department, we've heard, had to sleep at the fire department because they were interfacing with the public and transporting, folks, helping them with EMS transports, for example. They weren't able to go home, especially at the height of the pandemic. And so these are the kinds of uses that many communities have used the funds for. So to be eligible, there's really sort of a three-part test. The first is looking at whether or not you have an eligible worker. And we'll go talk about that a little bit more. And then you have to have an eligible worker that performs essential work. And that's key. And then the premium pay must respond to, and you'll see respond to is kind of a key phrase in ARPA in the final rule, to workers performing essential work during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And that goes through today because we're still in a public health emergency. As we mentioned, the next is the definition of eligible worker. So who is an eligible worker? This definition changed in the final rule and gave a lot more flexibility to local governments to basically include all local government employees. Before, it was more of a critical worker definition. And so you've heard that. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. That definition is now changed. And so any worker of town government is an eligible employee. The executive, the mayor, as part of your plan, you could also designate non-public entities as an eligible worker. So perhaps you would want to look at, someone else in the community who you believe performed an essential service, sort of put themselves, in harm's way over and above to serve the community at large. And that's a designation that you could make as part of your plan. In the next one, we'll go to what is essential work. Essential work is to ensure that the premium pay is targeted to workers that faced heightened risk due to the character of their work during the pandemic. And those workers that faced a disproportionate risk are likely folks like our public safety personnel. There is a lot of commentary about essential worker in the ARPA final rule and sort of the spirit of what they were trying to get at, making sure that those individuals who regularly and routinely were, face to face with public when the rest of us were at home, who had to put themselves in harm's way, or who had to come in, I think people like our IT, had to come in and facilitate public meetings when we were all working on Zoom, or people who had to come in and get the mail and were handling, things like checks from our sewer utility. They had to physically be here to get those checks and deposit it to keep government going. So really, those are the kinds of things that ARPA really speaks to. And then responded to, is that they were responding to, that you're using this pay to respond to compensating those additional workers. And the
Heather,
next.
one of the key words is regular, right?
Yes.
Because that was what I was thinking as well. I mean, a lot of folks work from home, but say you had to come into something or you had to interact with one or two people, that's probably not regular, right? Or if you were home, but you used a public vehicle, but you used it regularly, it had to be cleaned, or you were
right
handling the steering wheel or something like that.
Yeah.
But regular, I guess, is a bit of a nuanced.
Regular is something that the rule actually talks about a lot, because they're talking about, I think of myself going in and grabbing my mail, and my mask off my desk a couple times, during the height of the pandemic. I wasn't regularly in the office. There were colleagues of mine who were there the entire time, facilitating the mail, depositing checks, dealing with the maintenance of the building, those types of things. So our security personnel, for example, would be, in my mind, similar to what you might have at the town. There is a nuance, and I want to go back to it. One is that it cannot include individuals that teleworked. And that is very clear in the final rule. So if someone has been remote 100% of the time, they are not eligible for premium pay. Now, what gets a little confusing and a little bit more muddy, as this often does, is that, since we are now back open, we've been open, town hall's been open, people are back to work on a routine, regular basis, even though those individuals may have not been, working regularly during the height of the pandemic, and they may have teleworked for some portion of that job, we are still in a public health emergency. So with the final rule, we know that you could look at those individuals who've been here since the building is open, since they've been back to work full time, and they may be eligible for a premium pay. Now, if they've been still working from home, they're not going to be eligible. So what's so important, I think, is you can give some flat stipends, you can calculate this, and we'll talk about that. But you really have to look individual by individual by individual to determine how the calculation should work. If this is the policy of the town to give it to everyone, that's something you and the mayor's administration will have to determine if that's the policy you want, versus maybe just giving it to critical workers. We know that community, Zionsville and many other communities designated essential workers, right at the beginning of the pandemic, those individuals that had to come in to do their job. We did that. I know in Zionsville, other communities did that as well. You could choose that's who you wanted to give premium pay to. So really, you've got some flexibility, and it really is a policy decision. At this point, anybody that's back in the office working regularly, we're still in the pandemic, would technically be eligible. And then it would just be calculating based on the formula that is set out in ARPA, as well as through the State Board of Accounts. So on the next slide.
Heather, real quick, is it so it's like a one-time payment?
It is. So it is a one-time payment up to $25,000 to a single individual is what you're able to allocate. It gives you a lot of flexibility to decide that amount. Does not mean you have to give every person up to $25,000. You could designate different categories, like these are the folks who had to work from day one. These are the folks that have had to work since we came back to the office.
Right.
There's a lot of flexibility in the design, but you do have to follow specific criteria. And I think we may have a slide or two on that. We'll kind of flip forward. So we'll take the next one. This is the premium pay for eligible workers. You'll kind of see the criteria here. You can offer additional compensation up to $13 per hour in additional wages. And then the amounts in total cannot exceed $25,000 for any single eligible worker. Premium pay could be paid in a lump sum, or it could be paid in installments, and it can be awarded to eligible workers performing essential work, regardless of their being part-time or salaried, hourly or non-hourly workers. So again, a lot of flexibility to look at your workforce. And you can actually provide premium pay retroactively all the way to the beginning of the pandemic, which is January 27th, 2020. And then it may also be provided to third-party employers. So again, if you wanted to look at like a stipend for grocery workers or other classes of workers that would need to be designated, they could be non-public, meaning non-governmental employees. And you might decide, hey, we really think the restaurant workers need a fund, a bonus fund or something like that. With that, it's a lot to take in. So we know you're going to have a lot of questions as this moves forward. We've been doing a lot of this work with local communities, and I'm going to, if you have questions, we can try to answer them and share, additional information. I think the key is now really setting your plan, which needs to be done by April. Well, first, the initial, you want to talk about that?
So the plan, there's some flexibility on the time, but you can't spend the funds per SBOA guidance until you have a plan in place. So to the extent you want to start moving forward with any projects, you need to develop a plan for how you're going to spend the funds. And that can be amended. So if you adopt something in April and 6 months down the road, there's a great opportunity to do something different. It's not set in stone once you adopt it.
What if you missed that date?
Well,
There's a
so
lot to get done.
if you miss the obligated date,
The April 1st date, that's the first I've heard that date.
Yeah, that's not, so there's not a deadline to adopt the plan. It's just you have to have it adopted before you spend any funds.
So what was the April 1st date?
no,
You just made up the date.
I just made it up.
Got it.
Isn't that
Can-
what we do? No,
you-
there's a report due in April talking about, Veronica, there is a report due in April from the town that we will need to fill out.
Got it. So do you have to adopt an entire plan, or can you, like, for example, for me, it's a priority for me for premium pay for first responders before we do anything else. Can you adopt that part of the plan without figuring out how to spend the whole $6.3 million? And then maybe if we want to add other layers of workers later, we can have that discussion, or is it all predicated on getting everything done before you can spend that first penny?
I would take a look at the SBO guidance, but the way we've been doing it is that the plan contemplates the entirety of the funds, or at least so the town at this point has received half of that money that's in your ARPA account. So
Sure.
at least accounting for the dollars that you have received at this point. And then once you receive the second tranche, you can amend the plan at that point.
I just worry about there will be, I'm sure, lots of back and forth on differing priorities between administration and council. If that takes months and months and months, I would want this is just my own preference, first responders to not have to wait on that negotiation to get theirs. So is there like a template plan of like, hey, $400,000 going to first responders and then the rest of the money is going into TBD?
There's a lot of plans that communities have already adopted and developed and adopted. So we know that surrounding communities have already done that in a lot of cases. They're already spending the dollars from their plan. They're already allocating and appropriating funds. For example, Marion County has already spent money as part of their plan. They adopted it, to provide restaurant
But they passed
stipends
the
and
plan.
art
I think that the
stipends.
nuance is, what's the definition of that plan? You have
Yes.
through 2026 to spend this money. So not everybody's going to all of a sudden formulate something and go now.
Right, but there are certain things you want to go
Yeah,
now,
I agree,
right?
I agree.
That's, I guess, what I'm trying to look for some guidance on is how do we pay first responders while we still figure out how to spend the rest of the money in priorities that we all may have for the community?
Yeah, I do think that you need, I mean, the way that they define it is you just can't start spending willy-nilly,
Sure.
to use a very technical legal term. And so you really do need to have a plan in place. And this is, I know, something the council's been trying to prompt, like we need to start working on this so we can get this money out the door. I think the thought is they do want communities to be thoughtful about how this money is going to be impactful and not just sort of take one thing or, one or two things and start paying for it. To Veronica's point, you can always go back and amend the plan. So if your priorities shift or change, you get further along. I'm always a believer when it comes to federal money to spend it as quickly as possible before they change their mind. It just based on my, 28 years in government, but that is, it is, we've got money in the door. And so we do have the opportunity to start developing an initial plan. Maybe it's an initial plan that spends, a quarter of the money, and then you come back and it may be
So
something
that's
you
what
want
I'm
to
asking.
work, with the,
Or like, can we develop an initial plan that just says money for first responders? Or does it have to be all encompassing of all of them? Because I do want to be thoughtful about this money and I want to spend it appropriately, but there are things that have one thing that has more, in my mind, a more pressing timeline. And so I don't want to rush through the remaining of the money to get that bonus piece done, but I also don't want to wait on the bonus piece. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, we've prepared these plans for a number of communities. So what I think State Board of Accounts intent behind this is, again, that you're not just doing one-off expenditures and not thinking about the funding as a whole. So something you may be able to do is in the plan, say we're going to allocate this amount for this premium pay. And then because the lost revenue government services provision we talked about is so broad, maybe put the rest of the funds in there. And then as you come up with other projects, amend the plan should other projects outside of that category be something you want to move forward with.
Got it. So we can do that. We can kind of place hold the other money without necessarily specifically identifying where it's going for. One other comment, then I'll let it to others. For me, I think it's important if we can engage like formally Barnes and Thornburg. Veronica, I appreciate you coming up here today as a guide to go through this process, because the last thing I want to have happen is we spend $6.3 million and forget to file a form. And as a result, the government says, well, we want our $6.3 million back. So I think it's important to have like professional advice guiding us on that. And I know you guys have done this for other communities. So I would certainly be an advocate for being a partner with our community in making sure that we dot the i's, cross the t's, all that little stuff that can bite you.
it is very compliance intensive. They've I think tried to create some additional flexibility in the final rule, but it still requires a lot of reporting. And there's, even on the premium pay, there's very specific guidelines that you have to look back at Fair Labor Standards Act. And is an employee in this category or that category? Are they eligible for overtime? Are they not eligible? So it is, it's something I think that should also have strong accounting guidance and making sure that it meets the requirements and that, the team, Cindy and, the CFO's office is getting a lot of support because they've already got a very busy office. And then this is going to be complicated. Jo Keel and her team, just doing the calculations because you really do have to do them employee by employee by employee, which is just different than we've had to do in the past. So, a lot of communities have thought of this more like a bonus, like, hey, we're going to give everybody a bonus for doing a really great job. And it's really not that. Like, you really can't treat it like you would a bonus structure. It is very specific. So it really needs some strong, sort of accounting guidance and legal guidance throughout the process. And that'll really run all the way, to the completion of spending all of the funds.
Who owns this project?
Well, really both you and the mayor. So the town council, okay, so it talks a lot in the final rule and in ARPA about the executive, coming up with some of the policy decisions, but it also says the town council shall appropriate and allocate funds. So again, just like many things, you're helping set the policy. If you can't agree on the funds, the mayor could come up with a policy, but if you're not going to agree to pay for it, it's not going to work. So I mean, it really does need to be hand in glove, and there needs to be a lot of communication and collaboration on what that plan is going to look like.
Well, I'm just worried that the collaboration has not been there for 2 years. And I don't want people who deserve this money like sooner, like that we're not sitting here a year from now, still having the same discussion. How do we make, that's why I ask, who owns it? It's not necessarily who's the final say. I want to know who's pushing this through.
Yeah, well, I would recommend that, the council take a strong leadership role as well. I mean, and perhaps you even want to set a formal committee with the mayor to really develop the plan, because that really needs to be done. And in, a lot of instances, in some cities like the city of Indianapolis, the mayor presented a plan to the council, but the council was very involved in shaping that plan. A lot of communities are well out of the gate on this. So I would just encourage us to start, sooner rather than later. And
Joe, do you have any updates on what's going on with this or next steps? Since it'll have to go through you, I'd assume, for the first step that this group is wanting to take care of the first responders. Is there any updates from you? Okay.
and I will say, in credit to Joe, I mean, she's been
Well, it's not,
working
I didn't
on.
mean to put her on the
No,
spot.
no, no.
just, like, did.
I
meant
will
no,
just say
kidding.
that Joe has been sharing some information with council leadership about options and what that might look like. I failed to mention that, and I didn't see Joe, so that's why
Yeah.
you're hiding behind the chief.
Yeah.
But she has been sharing some options about, we could do this or we could do that. We could look at all employees, or we could look at public safety, and this, here's some scenarios. So her office is already working on that too.
I just worry that there's gonna be so many hands in the cookie jar. If there's not one person from each side of the team that's supposed to work on this, we're gonna be sitting here a year from now and nothing's gonna be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, obviously, I'm not in charge of anything, but I mean, I would recommend that there is a committee and maybe someone from council's named to lead that with a co-partner from the administration and a small group of people. Take proposal ideas and try to put it together. I mean, to your point, I think
That's good for
some
vice
strong
president to
leadership
do,
from
right?
it.
That's a
Well,
good vice president job.
I mean, I think before we get too far down there, I do think it's important, Josh, to your point. The objective has been to do this for first responders for the better part of 4 months now.
Correct.
I mean, this has been something that's been shared with the administration since October.
And the administration's is okay. They're on board with that?
The administration wants, I'm not going to speak for the administration, but based on emails I received from Joe, they certainly want something done. My point would be, just like yours, if we're going to try to figure out a way to spend $6.4 million anytime soon, that's going to be a monumental effort, given the history.
Yeah.
So my question would be, could we just say, from our perspective, we would like, and I don't know, Josh, if this is where you were going with this, but could we just say we want to put this stipend together for first responders, and until we receive another plan as a default, just sweep this into a lost revenue?
Well, I don't think we should wait to receive a plan, I think, but you're on the track I would like, which is first responders. What is that, right?
Yeah.
And then park everything else while mayor and council works on a plan.
Right.
Negotiates on a plan. Council should have a chance to weigh into that lead counselor. Thanks, Vice President Burke, to give them that information. And then that's when that negotiation happens.
Yeah.
It shouldn't all be driven by council, shouldn't all be driven by mayor. It's going to be both. And hopefully there is some overlap. I think there is overlap in first responders. And if that program is to be expanded to other workers, that's part of the discussion, but I don't want to wait on that.
I was going to mention as well, it's not a requirement of ARPA or the final rule or the State Board of Accounts, but several communities have also held public meetings to have input from the public on how to spend the money. I mean, certainly it's not binding, but they've really given their communities the opportunity to come in and say, hey, what would you like? What's your wish list? What are your needs? And they've heard from small businesses and school leaders and, healthcare clinics and others that are, working through the pandemic. So certainly no obligation to do that, but it does, bring the community together to talk about a pretty substantial investment in Zionsville.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot of options here, and I know Councilor Melton certainly is an advocate for Perry Township, and internet in Perry Township? I mean, if it sounds like that's something we could do, I
That
mean,
broadband expansion is an allowable use, and that's
Yeah.
where a lot of rural communities have looked at that. One of the things that we've talked about, Veronica and I, is, maybe providing some additional services to rural residents, because that's, something we've talked about as part of the reorganization process, making sure there is, better access for those folks. I mean, that obviously impacts work from home. It impacts people who are, doing remote school, all of those things, if you have unreliable broadband access. So lots of flexibility, lots of ideas that you could explore. And we can give you, ideas. And like we said, we've worked with lots and lots of communities on these plans and compliance plans and all of the related items. I'm sure others have as well.
Is there anybody from the administration that could give us an idea who the point of contact would be for someone in our group to kind of start getting the ball rolling, or do you guys already know that?
Well, I think it's the mayor. And then obviously Julie, the deputy mayor, and their council, Amy Nooning's also been involved. And Amy and I've talked.
Okay.
Joe's involved. Cindy, I'm sure will get involved because it really is multifaceted. But I mean, I think from a leader perspective, it's my opinion, it's the mayor and the council president, and then anybody else that can get involved.
yeah, I would just say, I mean, certainly at the 131 check-in call with the administration, I mean, there was communication about wanting this done. I was also pleased to hear the mayor indicate that, or the mayor's attorney, I should say, indicate that, we would be able to engage whoever we wanted in this particular matter. So I liked hearing that. So, I mean, I feel like, I mean, we're not going to have a meeting, mid-February meeting. So our next meeting is going to be in March. Are there any actionable items or steps we can take if council agrees that we want to work with the administration on all this money and we want first responders paid now? Is that the general feel of the council? Would anyone disagree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing we know, we're going to be able to agree upon
Yeah.
with the administration. So let's knock that out and move forward with the rest after.
My other ask is that B&T is engaged on the process,
Yeah.
right, to help guide it, but I'd love to be able to vote on this next meeting.
Yeah. me
Yeah.
too. That's what I-
Agreed. Anybody else have a,
So I think then we're just gonna need to do a follow-up and we can send a note in the morning to the folks, Amy and the mayor and Julie and you, Joe. I mean, I think that's the next step, is deciding what policy we want to bring forward. And is it all employees? Is it some employees, and who's eligible and how that might look? So I know, like I said,
I think from our
Joe's been doing
perspective,
that.
we'd like to start with first responders. And
Right,
Right.
because we know we're going to be able to
Yeah.
agree there.
Yeah.
mean,
And then the key is though, we're going to need to develop a plan that's more than
Right.
just that, which I think we just
So we
want to
can
keep
come back to
impressing,
that.
because the State Board of Accounts has been very sticky about that.
so let's say council agrees, we want first responders, the stipend for first responders, and we may want to extend that, right? Or expand on that. In the scenario reference, we could identify this is how much money we're giving to first responders,
Sweet.
and then sweep the rest into the lost revenue, and then come back and say, we've seen other municipalities do this with other members of the town staff, and it's worked out. Here's how they've done it, and we can lean on that and make those adjustments at that point.
Yes, you could definitely do that. And that will give you time to allow the public to weigh in and work
Yeah.
out the details. So
I like that. You guys like that?
sorry, Lance. I think Lance wanted his $1 million.
We might still get it. He got
2026.
He got 600 tonight.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Veronica.
All right, on the home stretch. Up next is a cancellation of warrants. Cindy, I believe you are up for this.
This is something that we're required to do annually. Whenever we have a check that is still outstanding after 2 years, we have to go through the process and do an official cancellation of the check. So we had 6 that from 2019 that we just need to go through and do a cancellation on them.
And there's no vote on this. This is just you're notifying us.
Is there?
Do we not need a vote?
No, we don't.
Okay,
Yeah, we do this every year, and it's just any Cindy can tell you better, but any checks that are still outstanding for 2 years as of December 31st, and it's just by statute, and it just gets receipted back into the fund where it originally came.
Yes.
I do think the State Board of Accounts requires us to read it at the town council meeting, just as part of the public transparency process, so that those minutes
Okay.
attach for the State Board of Accounts for audit purposes, for example.
We don't have to read each check though, right? We can just
Right.
say that we're canceling.
We're just
Yeah.
canceling the checks, right?
Could
Okay,
I ask a question on one of them?
sure.
And Cindy, I understand I'm kind of putting you on the spot. So if you don't have the answer, and given we don't have a vote, if you can just give the answer at some point.
Okay.
Knowing what I know about banks and how particular we can be,
Mhm.
I'm just curious about the check payable to Bank of New York Mellon for a Park District bond. I just want to make sure that, because I know that, say it went to the wrong address
Mhm.
in a bank's mind, that is no excuse for it not being paid. I just want to make sure that was paid at some point, that we're not delinquent on something.
No, it was paid. What happened was this check was an error and it should have been voided and it never was.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I feel much better then. Thank you.
You're
How about
welcome.
that? All right, any other questions for Cindy? Thank you, Cindy. Up next on the agenda is approval to amend the 2022 schedule of meetings. Amy, I believe you're presenting on this.
Yes, the amendment is just that we are canceling, we are taking off the second February meeting for town council and also for Board of Police Commissioners. And that is the only change to the original schedule.
And that change is due to the school scheduling and everybody
Yes.
kind of being out of town. Very good. Any questions for Amy? Otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Who was that? Josh?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I told you I can't.
I
hear
know.
from your left
I know.
ear.
Feel like Van Gogh over there.
Second by, first by Plunkett, second by Garrett. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
Did Alex vote?
I did not vote.
5 in favor, 0 opposed. Up next, other matters. Are there any counselors who have other matters they would like to discuss? Going once?
Yeah, I do have one thing for everybody. March 8th, we'll be doing the second Conservation District Community Town Hall like we did last time. You guys are more than welcome to attend, but this one is strictly just going over the creating the commission. So, but there'll be a postcard going out to all the residents of Zionsville. We'll be right here again. Wayne will be up here with me, and probably someone from the state as well, and kind of just go through the last piece and hopefully get to present that to you guys in March.
What time?
Oh, I knew you were gonna say that.
Sorry.
I'm sure it's 6:30 on the 8th here in this room. Let me pull that up. You'll want that for the notes. See, it's on my calendar. It's at 6 in this room. And on the website, if you check it out, got a quick little video explaining what we'll be talking about. Amanda did a great job. She did all the work. I just showed up and Joe took the video, but kind of explains the way we're going with the conservation district. And like I said, I think almost all of you showed up to the last meeting. I don't know if there's going to be as many people at this one because it's just the setting up the commission, but I at least want to let you know that I want the town to be able to have their option to give their feedback. And Joe, I assume we would videotape that anyways if any of you guys wanted to watch later, but you're more than welcome to show up. But like Brad, you really helped out last time. I appreciate that and sticking around at a very long meeting.
It was good.
So I think, thank you for your time. So that finally, that project might after.
Joe, it's assuming you may want to move forward with something after that. Do you have a time frame in mind? I mean, 30
Well,
days after. 60 days
That's a question I have for Heather is typically when you have a new ordinance like that, because I've never proposed one before, would there be like a first reading? And
Yes,
then like questions and then So it would be at least a month after March 8th.
Yeah, I think the goal, and first, I would just like to acknowledge how hard Counselor Culp has worked on this. I
Yes.
mean, it's a tremendous effort of time and energy and just a thoughtful group of people from the village who've been working so hard on it as well. But I think what we would want to do is take any additional feedback from the final draft that would be talked about at the next public meeting, incorporate that in, which might take a week or so. Because we'll incorporate it and then we'll send it to the mayor's council and they take a look at it. We've been doing this really in close ties with them and then probably bring it to the next council meeting thereafter. So maybe 2 weeks after the meeting. And so then that would be the next 2 weeks after the public hearing, we could probably have first reading.
Yeah.
If people were ready.
So.
And then it would take two council meetings unless we did a two-step process, but this is probably important enough that we'd probably not recommend that.
Yeah, no, we need to do two different meetings for sure.
Yeah,
So-
second on the thank you, and we may have to brand this the Culp Act,
Oh, geez.
something for posterity.
Oh, jeez. It depends how favorable it is.
Well, that's true, too.
I got people to vote for me in 2 years, so.
All right, anything else? If nothing else, we'll move on to claims, and I believe Heather, Amy, there's something about claims we want to go through. This was the old claims we got to sign,
Yes,
right?
and so you'll recall from our last meeting, Cindy Poor shared with us that there was some 2022 claims on the 2021 form and vice versa. They've been corrected. You already voted on this, so there's no need for a vote. We just need your signatures on the document. So you're going to see 2022 on top and 2021 on the bottom. So this is not tonight's claims, just need signatures. And then we just need to proceed with the regular claims.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions on the claims that were presented for this meeting?
I don't have a question, surprisingly, but I do have a little bit of an education that I provided myself and along with the help of Amy. So there is a claim on here for $10,000 that I questioned. It was coming out of the food and beverage fund for some preliminary engineering on a possible parking structure. And I said, this is outside of what we normally would approve from the food and beverage fund. So I wanted to make sure that it could actually be spent from that fund. So I asked Amy if she could come up with the ordinances establishing the food and beverage tax in the fund. And she did. And I was surprised to learn that not only can we use the food and beverage tax money for parking structure, but actually that was the original intent of the food and beverage tax. If you go back to the original ordinance establishing the food and beverage tax and the food and beverage fund, it says right in there that the use of those funds is for a parking structure or parking improvements for Zionsville. Now in 2007 and 2014, that ordinance was updated to allow for also things that would help to promote the town of Zionsville and our businesses. So it was broadened, but I thought I'd share because I think it's always good for us to kind of know the history of these funds and what they were originally used for. I do not have a question on the claims as it turns out. Because this fund, that $10,000 claim for engineering is exactly what that fund was supposed to be for originally.
Thank you, history teacher. Trey.
Yeah. My mom will be so proud. She's a teacher.
Having no questions, I'll make a motion to approve claims. Second by Counselor Burke. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
First by Garrett, second by Trailer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion passes 6 in favor, 0 opposed. The next regularly scheduled town council meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 7th, 2022 at 7 p.m. in the Zionsville Town Hall Council Chambers. Final notice will be posted in compliance with the Indiana open door law.